Well, this is King Rex coming at you with another video. This video is entitled Let's Fix United States Awful Borders. I'm doing a reaction slash rebuttal to this video. Without further ado, I'll let the video start.
The United States is a mess. As it grew from east to west, it acquired territories, carved them up, divided them even more, and eventually made them all into individual states. But this process made no sense, and many states were divided and created for stupid political reasons rather than anything natural. When all was said and done, we ended up with a country whose state borders look very fake. So I decided to fix them. Mostly along natural borders, but also there's some other stuff too. And before you get too riled up, this is gonna be fun. Probably.
I don't like when they put a disclaimer that this is just for fun, because then it's kind of like saying, oh, we don't want you to rebut or say anything negative against our video. If you put it out there, you gotta expect people to rebut it. That's what happens on the internet.
The first place I want to start as we fix borders are the states that are essentially just duplicates that were formed for reasons that never really made sense in the first place. The biggest culprit here is North and South Dakota. These two states were originally created out of a single territory called Dakota. But when the territory was about to be admitted as a full state, it was quickly divided into two states in order to give the Republican Party at the time a congressional advantage. Basically, we have two Dakotas for political reasons and nothing more, so they're now back to just being called Dakota.
This is actually a myth that was made up on Reddit about 5 to 10 years ago. What happened was someone looked at basically the presidential election maps, electoral college maps, going back to like the 1970s, and Republicans have won both of those states every time since then. So they assumed that those states were only created to give the Republicans extra electoral votes, uh, which is kind of a nonsensical when you think about the fact that these states were put in the Union in 1889. So when they were put in this Union, you'd have to have had someone that would have known that, okay, 90 years down the road or 80 years down the road, these are going to be solid Republican states, so we'll put them in now. We'll sneak that in now and just wait 80 years for that to happen. And even at this current time, there's been representatives and senators from those states. In fact, in the 1972 election, the Democratic nominee for president was the governor of South Dakota, George McGovern. If these states would have been put in to help Republicans, they would have started helping Republicans immediately. You would have expected that to be showing on all levels, including in presidential elections. Well, in the first presidential election after these states were admitted into the Union in 1892, a Republican candidate did not win North Dakota. In the next election in 1896, the Republican candidate did not win South Dakota, even though that was a big landslide where McKinley crushed William Jennings Bryan. In the election of 1916, which was a very close election, Republican did not win South Dakota in that one, and Republican candidate did not win either state in 1912. Yeah, there are a few elections in there where they did win both states, but like lots of one of those was like when Teddy Roosevelt in 1904 won every single state except for the former Confederate states and Kentucky. So pretty much Republicans, these are pretty much what you would call purple states today when they first came into the Union. It's only recently that these were states that were actually solidly Republican. They point to say, well, they were created out of the same territory. But if you look, the Louisiana Purchase, which created the Louisiana Territory, with a few little differences up in this area where they negotiated out with Britain to make that line there. All that was one territory at one point. So was this area here, which they negotiated with the Spanish. So you had this whole big area. When they made Louisiana a state, they didn't make the whole territory Louisiana. They broke out a smaller state. That's how they always did territories. Bigger territory breaks down to smaller states. Another one would be the Northwest Territory, which originally this whole area was the Northwest Territory. Then they split it with the Northwest Territory being the East and the Indiana Territory being the West. They made Ohio a state, and the whole thing became the Indiana Territory. Then they created the Michigan Territory and left the rest Indiana. Then they split that territory into Indiana, Illinois Territory, and Michigan Territory, along with Ohio as a state. So as you can see, and even there, if you look at the light blue, this area up here is still part of the Indiana Territory. although it eventually became the state of Michigan. So as you can actually see, territories, just because it's the same territory doesn't mean it gets to be one big state. Furthermore, another thing that would make sense would be the size of physical size, square miles, and the population. In 1889 and 1890, they admitted 6 states to the Union. They hadn't admitted any states since 1876. If you look at the population, Washington was the biggest one, but the next biggest was South Dakota. And those 2 states were far and away bigger than the rest of them, but the third was North Dakota. So by population, it definitely made sense to split these states. You can honestly argue that they probably should have split up to where South Dakota was a little bit smaller, so more population would have been in North Dakota. And if you look at the size of the states, Washington, North Dakota, and South Dakota are all kind of about the same, and Idaho's a little bit bigger. Montana's bigger, but Montana has the least population there. These two have a lot less population. So by size, square miles, size, population, and actually the political makeup at the time, because these states weren't dominated by Republicans, it made sense to split the Dakotas. Like I said, it's just this conspiracy theory somebody came up with on Reddit, as they tend to do. People just have a very shallow understanding of history, and they make some crazy thing up. And they said, oh, that had to be Republicans somehow cheating.
Up next are the Carolinas. Now, these two date back before the United States was even a thing, so maybe there's an argument to keep them separate, but I'm not going to do that. These two colonies split because of a war with a local indigenous tribe. The Northerners at the time required more resources to acquire the land they wanted, and the Southerners didn't really want to help, so they split. Well, that doesn't seem like a good enough reason for divorce to me, so now they're back to being just Carolina.
Should be noted that what is today Washington, D.C. and Delaware were both part of Ireland, so they have to go back together. For putting them back together based on the original colonial decrees from the Crown, Vermont was part of New York, and Maine was part of Massachusetts, and West Virginia was part of Virginia. In fact, West Virginia was part of Virginia after the United States was formed and was a state, and Maine was part of Massachusetts after the United States was part of a state. So, for putting the Carolinas together, we have to put these other ones together too, to be, if we're being totally consistent and making sense, as he says.
And finally, we have the two Virginias. But unlike with the other two, I'm going to keep these two separate, mostly because West Virginia broke away so as to stay with the Union during the American Civil War, and, well, I think that's a very good reason to become a separate state. Nice job, West Virginia.
Yep, the issue here is that it's actually unconstitutional to create a state out of another state. What should have happened at the time was they should have said that was the government of Virginia and said they were one big state, because they claimed that the Confederacy never actually left. Once again, now, if you got to keep the Carolinas together, you got to keep the Virginias together. So, inconsistency. We're seeing a lot of inconsistency here.
All right, with those states out of the way, let's get to fixing the rest of the borders.
Look how big this state is, though. Remember how big this is, especially compared to, this here is probably almost as big as Ohio, at least the western part of Pennsylvania and the western part of New York. Maybe almost as big as all three of those together. Just bear that in mind.
And we're going to start with the square states in the West. The United States has some wacky borders, mostly in the western half of the country.
How would you consider these straight lines to be wacky? I just don't understand that part of it.
So we're going to chop all of these states up and break them apart, largely along natural features. This means using the Continental Divide, mountain ranges, rivers, and deserts to make these new borders, mostly in that order. So let's get to it. Now, given its prominence, we're going to start by dividing the states up by the Rocky Mountains and the Continental Divide that runs through it. So, from north to south, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico all get split in half, with their former western sides joining the states of Idaho, Utah, and Arizona respectively. This already makes way more sense in my head.
If we're going to go along continental divides and mountain ranges, then we should use this Cascade Mountain Range from here up through Oregon and Washington and split, make the eastern part of those states one state, and the western part of those states another state. So it's not two states; you just split them differently. Um, I think. I mean, if you're going to go by mountain ranges and continental divides and stuff like that, you have to do this one too.
Let's keep heading west since we're going in that direction and focus on Nevada. Nevada is mostly one big desert. In fact, I ranked it the state with the worst geography because of this. So why not double down and just give them the deserts of California and Oregon as well? Done. This leaves California a little top-heavy, but most of its population is in the south still, so it evens out. Maybe? And this just leaves Oregon and Washington. Honestly, both states are mostly fine except for one thing. Oregon is largely divided along the Columbia and Snake.
Remember I said he was going to do mountain ranges and divides first. Well, here he doesn't care about that.
Rivers. But in the northeast of Oregon, instead of the border following the Snake River, it just cuts straight across. So we're just going to add that missing chunk back to Oregon and call it a day. As for the other western states, just a few minor changes.
Does this look less wacky than what we have today? This looks really wacky to me. Remember, you said it was too wacky before. Like, why would you put this part here when you could have, left that in Colorado somehow, Maybe, or Utah. You could have just went right straight across it with Idaho or something, Even that would make more sense.
The Dakotas are, of course, just a single state now. Done. Nebraska and Kansas are mostly fine, except Kansas City is now in Kansas.
Well, that's done based on the river that goes through there, though. And just because it's named Kansas City doesn't mean it has to be part of Kansas. That's just weird.
Come on, guys, that one should be obvious. And then we're going to give Texas's hat to Oklahoma to get rid of that wonky little panhandle, and we'll make this divide along the Red River. Texas is way too big anyways, so it's time to slim up just a little bit.
Texas is too big, but the Dakotas wouldn't be.
The West has been fixed, mostly. Things are still a little awkward, but it looks a lot more natural now. So let's move on to the rest of the...
That does not look natural to me. That looks insane to me.
The eastern half of the United States is not in nearly as bad of shape, so our fixes over here will be relatively minor compared to the western, blockier half. But there's still some things I want to change. First, let's head to the deep south. This whole area is wrong. First, Louisiana is the only state that doesn't get divided up by the Mississippi River. But we can't have New Orleans and Baton Rouge in Mississippi, so we'll make a concession here. The eastern side of Louisiana...
It was mainly that way simply because of those cities were on the river to keep the delta there. He's still not dividing by the river by doing this. He's just taking this chunk out.
Up to Lake Pontchartrain will now be part of Mississippi, excluding Baton Rouge, which is a little weird, but still worth it. Next, Florida has a really long panhandle, preventing it from being a true peninsular state.
Why does that matter? All states have panhandles.
So, let's just go ahead and give the western edge of Florida's panhandle to Alabama. It's not like Florida needs more coastline anyways. Also, I have a sneaking suspicion that that part of Florida is more culturally Alabama anyways.
I have a sneaking suspicion. That makes a lot of sense.
Moving north from Florida, we actually have another continental divide. This is the divide that largely follows the Appalachian Range. And just like with the Rockies, we're going to split up all of the states along this line. So that means that Georgia, Carolina, which was already merged together, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania are all split. The eastern side will remain their own states, but the western ends will join Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio. The latter two split along the Ohio River. Now, you might have noticed that the Appalachian Continental Divide goes north into New York. You're not wrong to think that this might necessitate a split, but I decided not to split it in half because the only logical state that would absorb that land would be Ohio. And I just couldn't bring myself to make Ohio even bigger.
Well, you could put the Dakotas together. Remember, this here would still be smaller than what he did in the Dakotas. Inconsistency.
So New York stays as is. Now, before we head too far north,
Plus, if you look at it, New York here is probably still as big as Ohio. So, like, you're letting one have the size rather than the other.
there's one other thing we gotta fix: the Delmarva Peninsula. Right now, it's split between Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, with Delaware really getting shafted here.
Delaware was supposed to be part of Maryland to begin with, so they never were really shafted. They got to be their own state when they really shouldn't have, especially since he's putting the Carolinas together. Remember that.
So, it's now all Delaware. As for the rest of the Northeast, it's fine. There's nothing too obvious here to fix.
There's a lot of changes you can make to the rest of this. There are rivers that go through here. Remember that Vermont was part of New York. Massachusetts was part of, Maine was part of Massachusetts. Why are none of those being fixed? I mean, Rhode Island's too small of a state to make Rhode Island and Connecticut into one bigger state. In fact, that would make a lot more sense. In fact, it would make more sense to, almost make the whole of New England into one state rather than six separate ones.
New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine get to keep their current borders. Congratulations on either not being awkward enough for me to fix your borders, or for being so small that if I changed anything, it would be a literal existential crisis. This just leaves us with the Midwest to straighten out. So let's start with Michigan. I'm sorry, but you can't have the Upper Peninsula anymore. It's physically connected to Wisconsin and therefore should belong to them. But in exchange, you can have the Toledo Strip back from Ohio.
I would probably gladly give the Toledo Strip to him. But once again, you're taking more away from Ohio. It would make sense for this line to go straight across here from Indiana. What do you think about it?
Which is what you wanted originally. I'm not really sure what that does for you today, but it is what it is. And that's basically it. The rest are mostly fine. In fact, Minnesota might have the most perfect borders of any contiguous US state. It's mostly made up of the Minnesota, St. Croix, and Mississippi rivers.
Doesn't the river, this area here, go down to Iowa, though? I mean, if you're going by rivers, does it make sense to have these straight lines there? Why would you not give that to Iowa? It also would make them perfect borders if you think other states already have perfect borders. Especially states you didn't touch, like Indiana and Illinois.
Aside from a few straight areas and its southern border. But we'll just blame the southern border on Iowa. Indiana,
yes, it's Iowa's fault it didn't get that land.
Illinois, and Arkansas rounds out the last of the lower 48, and they're all passable. With
technically speaking, when you run that line straight across and give this little small panhandle up to down to Arkansas to make that look more reasonable. Like if you're going to just start redrawing lines randomly, wouldn't it make sense?
Nothing obvious to fix about them.
I'll be deep in the cold, cold ground before I recognize Missouri.
And, of course, there's Alaska and Hawaii. But obviously, neither can have their borders changed because they don't border anyone else. Well, Alaska does border Canada, but we're not going international with this video. There's one final thing you might have noticed. I combined 4 states into 2 states, which means we only have 48 states.
So, you shouldn't have combined those states, but okay.
Now, maybe you're not a patriot, but I demand that the old Stars and Stripes have 50 full stars on them.
Basically, by this, you're saying anybody who, had a flag that was made before the late 50s when Alaska and Hawaii were out of the States were not patriots. That's just kind of stupid on his end. Well, let's see where he goes with this. I guarantee he's not going to go to a smart spot.
So we got to add a couple states.
We really don't need to add any states.
This is actually pretty easy because, in case you were unaware, the United States owns territories that are not full states within the country. So we can
Those territories don't need to be full states, though.
Cobble together some states from them, right? The most obvious full state to include would be Puerto Rico. It has more people than 19 other states, and as such, makes no sense to keep it as a territory in my eyes.
Well, we've actually offered statehood to Puerto Rico, and they've turned it down. To me, it would make most sense to take Puerto Rico and grant it its independence and let it become a fully independent nation. I mean, like we did with the Philippines. Especially when people complain about, colonialism and all that bull crap. I'd say just let Puerto Rico go. Let it be its own country. And we can offer military support to or make it an ally so no one attacks it if we want, but I don't think anybody would. But yeah, just grant it its independence and move on.
So, welcome aboard Puerto Rico. And because they're nearby and also a territory, we're going to add the US Virgin Islands as part of Puerto Rico. Next up are the territories of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, these two territories are pretty small, but strategically they're very important. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to combine both into a single state called Mariana, because the whole island chain for both is called the Mariana Islands.
They're really not big enough to be a state. They should not be a state. Come on. That just doesn't make any sense.
It will be the smallest state by population by far, but when Nevada was admitted to the Union, there were fewer than 8,000 people living there.
That's 1860. That's not 2025 or 2026.
So I think we can manage. As for American Samoa, it kind of feels like it should be unified with Samoa, but that's really not for me to decide.
Well, actually, we're going to let it go, and they voted to stay part of U.S. territory. They voted in favor of that. So that's why they're still part of the United States.
So we'll leave them as a territory for now. And as for Washington, D.C., I'm just going to leave it as is until the politicians figure it out.
Well, technically, Washington, D.C. is only half the size it originally was, because when the state of Virginia seceded from the Union, the part of Washington, D.C. that was made up from Virginia left for Virginia. So just put Washington, D.C. back in Maryland and you're good to go. You're fine. That's all you have to do. Washington, all that's taken care of. Really, you could have 50 states and it makes sense. You don't need to do all these crazy things he's done.
Basically, I'm not touching it. It can stay as a little half square for now. But there we have it. We got our 2 stars back with Puerto Rico and Mariana making for a full 50 states once again. We did it.
There's a little bit more to his video. Apparently, that thing came out right before the 2024 election. He was basically asking people to vote. I just want to say I much prefer this map to the map he made. I want to thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and have a great day.